lot of people today are hesitant to go to the doctor, not because they don't care about their health, but because they're tired of being handed a prescription pad every time they walk in. The system feels driven more by big pharma profits than actual healing. But what if there was another way? And that's where naturopathic medicine comes in. Now, I know some of you might hear that and immediately think snake oil or pseudoscience, but the truth is naturopathic medicine is real, it's evidence-based, and for many, it's life-changing. So what exactly is it? And can it help us break free from the pill-popping culture we've grown used to? Joining us today is someone who knows both sides of the medical world, Dr. Karim Kandil. He is one of the rare doctors with training in both conventional and naturopathic medicine. He's an MD, and he's a naturopathic doctor. He's also the medical director of Naturopathic Doctor News and Review, and sees patients virtually and in person at Fitra Wellness in Janesville, Wisconsin. Dr. Kandil, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you about this topic of naturopathic medicine because, a lot of people are very weary of a lot of the medical community and what's going on and skeptical. And I think rightly skeptical. I think finally kind of becoming maybe rightly skeptical of, do I really need to be pumped full of all of these drugs, in order to survive, in order to heal, in order to survive? So tell us about first of all, tell us what exactly is naturopathic medicine, because is this like Chinese medicine, like Eastern medicine? How would you describe it?
So naturopathic medicine, naturopathy, is based on the root words, natura, which means nature, but also refers to root cause, and pathos, which means suffering. And so it is oftentimes referred to as nature cure, or essentially addressing suffering from that root cause. Naturopathic medicine, as it exists currently, would probably be considered to be the original integrative medicine. It really kind of took a number of different healing traditions based on traditional herbalism, water cure that came out of Europe, homeopathy, as well as physical medicine, as is seen from chiropractic and osteopathy, and integrated it into this comprehensive system of medicine that, again, is holistic, focuses on treating the individual and using natural means towards achieving cure, which contrasts with, the medical system known as allopathy, which is using something different for treating suffering. So when we think of allopathic medicine, we think of anti-inflammatories, antibiotics, because we're essentially working at a heroic level to essentially stop and antagonize that disease process, using these patented pharmaceuticals.
Okay, so this would be nature's cures, is what you're kind of saying?
Yep, it is traditionally referred to as nature cure, but naturopathic medicine, just like conventional allopathic medicine, has gone through an evolution throughout its time. And so if one looks at like the current naturopathic medical education through the accredited naturopathic medical institutions, they do focus on the same basic sciences curriculum as your conventional medical education, your anatomy, physiology, pathology, pharmacology. But in addition, they're also focusing on the use of natural healing modalities. So the very strong emphasis on lifestyle, diet and exercise, the use of
who would have
medicine.
thought? Who would have thought diet and exercise would actually, be important for your health? I mean, it's amazing that that's not ever discussed with, doctors will once in a while mention it, like, change it. But really, they're just so quick to pump pills into people. So it's nice to hear that in this case, it's actually, hey, by the way, live cleaner and healthier, and maybe you won't have so many illnesses. So who would have thought?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, we're definitely dealing with a crisis of chronic disease burden, in the country. I mean, 70% of American adults have some diagnosed chronic disease, and 75% of our healthcare dollars are spent on chronic disease. And, since I come from that dual background, I completed my allopathic education first, and then found out about naturopathic medicine, and, it just very much appealed to me in terms of its approach, having kind of this larger bandwidth of modalities to choose from, especially herbal medicine, is something that's kind of interesting to me because I like the concept of open source medicine, one that doesn't kind of, require, access to, oftentimes expensive, patented pharmaceuticals.
Sure.
And I think it's worth noting that, the vast majority of medical practitioners, whether they are allopathic or naturopathic, I believe are highly compassionate, highly educated, concerned individuals. But I think it's just the reality of the systems that we're dealing with. The fact of the matter is, a lot of medical doctors wish that they could spend the time talking to patients, but since a vast majority of medical doctors are oftentimes hired by hospital systems, and in order for them to be able to get adequate compensation through the insurance industry, you want to be able to see as many patients as possible in a certain amount of time, and ideally get them on some sort of prescription or some sort of other treatment that is monetizable. And so I do believe that there is an awakening amongst a lot of conventional physicians who are looking to naturopathic medicine and other approaches to really kind of focus on the root cause. Mm-hmm. And again, when one thinks about, where conventional medicine shines, oftentimes it's kind of in emergency medicine, which was really what kind of first drew me into medicine in the first place. So when it comes to, life-saving, surgeries, and antibiotics for very severe infections, it's great that we have that option. But like a lot of things that kind of happened, say, in that sort of, post-World War II era, in the same way that we developed a lot of methods of food preservation, such as canning and a lot of these other forms of preserving food that would allow us to, have, shelf-stable food and be able to deliver that to the front lines. Antibiotics were definitely a huge lifesaver, on the war front during World War II. But, what ends up happening, unfortunately, is we then take kind of this emergency approach and we standardize it to kind of the day-to-day living. Mm-hmm. And that's what ends up resulting in this kind of unsustainable issue.
Yeah. Okay, a few questions for you. The first, I would say, criticism or question or concern maybe people would have is, okay, so if I turn to nature, that didn't work for. Modern medicine has been a marvel. It really has been. Mm-hmm. People's lives are longer now. It's incredible that we can cure and heal and do all these things with pharmaceuticals, with traditional medicine. I think most of us, we're not against any of that. We think it's just gone overboard, right? It's been way too monetized. Essentially, they're just pumping pills into people. We saw obviously an opioid epidemic. There's a lot of, now we have like what many of us would say, epidemic where they just want to shoot as many vaccines as they can into kids. It's just all about making money and it's no longer about human health. But that being said, even though many of us are very skeptical of the big pharma industries, would still say, yeah, but I still use pharmaceuticals, albeit sparingly, but I use them for, if I need to really cure something, and Western medicine's the way to go. So I think people would say, so if I just turn to plants, if I just turn to like herbs and plants and teas, I just don't think that that's going to actually, people before pharmaceuticals, people would just die at how old? 45 years old or something was like the maximum lifespan or whatever, and you could say, well, that's because of, there could be other reasons for that as far as like infections, clean water, sewage, right? There's all kinds of things that go into that. But I guess, could somebody live their whole life not taking pharmaceuticals and just taking like these naturopathic remedies instead?
Absolutely. And again, naturopathic medicine is based on an approach. And one of the things that helped kind of sell me in naturopathic medicine, because, I come from that conventional medical education, I realized that, a lot of these medications are absolutely essential, but there is definitely an epidemic of overprescribing and not recognizing that bio-individuality, the fact that every patient is unique. And we can, talk about, studies and saying, 70%, got X amount of improvement, but what about the others? And so naturopathic medicine takes a very individualized approach, which can definitely involve some of these modalities we talked about, using, hydrotherapy, water cure, using homeopathy, using different herbs, amino acids and whatnot. But it also can involve the use of pharmaceuticals where indicated. And so basically, depending on the level of severity, you address it at that level. But, I think part of the issue is sometimes allopathic medicine kind of functions in its own vacuum, if you would. In other words, part of the issue is with a lot of these medications is medications can be directly toxic. They can result in nutritional deficiencies. And so a naturopathic approach may not be to say that, you should not be on, any drugs. I mean, if you're a type 1 diabetic, you need insulin to survive. I mean, there isn't a plant that can give you that, replacement. However, there are plants that can help with, that increased glucose sensitivity that can, help support you. There are different, vitamins, different amino acids that a person, may need who may be depleted. And so we're looking to support the overall person. We're looking to support overall health using naturopathic medicine.
Okay.
And I think it depends on, the patient and the situation. There are many people who, never have to take pills. They're able to, manage their health because one of the key, cornerstones and principles of naturopathic medicine is, focusing on prevention because, prevention is definitely going to be, better than trying to kind of cure it later down the line. But the important thing is to, see a qualified, naturopathic physician, especially one who, has gone through the rigors of, a naturopathic education that is properly accredited, as they do learn about, okay, this is what we can do depending on our scope of practice within this state, and then this is where they may need additional specialist care.
Sure. Okay, so let's just kind of give an example. So somebody comes into your office and they are overweight and they have type 2 diabetes, but they're like severe. Let's say they're severely overweight, to where would you start them and say, all right, we're going to do like Ozempic for a little while because you need it. And then, but at the same time, you need to be doing, not only are we going to be prescribing you this medication, I guess, but at the same time, you have to diet and exercise. Otherwise, I'm going to pull the prescription. I'm not going to let you use it anymore. You must be dieting. You must be exercising. And then, we're going to try to wean you off of this and get you to a spot where is it like that? Or is it just pure, whatever your problem is, we're going to treat it just with diet and exercise for this particular, like what would you do with somebody morbidly obese with type 2 diabetes?
No, that's a very valid point. And so it really kind of depends on the individual naturopathic doctor, because everyone's going to have a slightly different approach, but they're going to be working on the same principles. But the fact of the matter is, if you have a patient who's morbidly obese, a lot of times it can be beneficial to do something that will essentially kind of, facilitate and act as a catalyst in that healing process. And, we're still learning a lot about, these, GLP-1s like Ozempic. We are seeing that there are some benefits, but there are some concerns for side effects. So I think part of the issue is going to be in the approach. A lot of times we tend to see more issues when people are taking higher doses for longer periods of time. And so a methodology that tries to use the minimal effective dose, and that regardless of what your approach is going to be, whether it's a conventional drug, whether it's, a nutraceutical, some type of supplement, using essentially only what is needed for that patient. And so, yes, it is possible. You can definitely use that. There are a lot of naturopathic physicians that do integrate, the use of these drugs like Ozempic in their practice. But of course, they're going to try and figure out, okay, what is going to be, the best diet for this patient? Because, you can look at a lot of different data. There's going to be, for almost any type of approach, for any type of intervention, there will always be some evidence for and some evidence against it. And that's where, again, the individual is going to be very important. And that's where that doctor-patient relationship is a collaboration in which you work with the patient. You try out what you think is going to work. And if that doesn't work, you try something different. And I think that flexibility is an important part of the approach to naturopathic medicine.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to get at, because I'm just trying to understand it fully. Like if somebody morbidly obese goes to a traditional doctor, the doctor's just going to pump them full of Ozempic, and that's going to be kind of the end of it. Like, here's your dose, keep going up and up and up on the dose. Like, you just got until you lose all the weight that you want, and and they might say, and by the way, you should probably diet and exercise. And it might be something that's kind of mentioned in passing, but fundamentally, they're thinking the cure is just this peptide or whatever you want to call the GLP-1, right? Like, that's the cure. Whereas, like, on the opposite end, what I'm trying to suss out is that On the opposite end, you could end up going to, I don't know, like an herbalist and dietitian who's going to say, take this tea, drink this tea every night, and here's a new diet, and here's a tea, and and we're familiar with a lot of these supplements that they sell over the counter that are like, this will help you lose weight, right? It's an amino acid that helps you lose weight, or it's some plant that helps, that stimulates weight loss, right? Like people have been buying these pills forever and ever and ever, hoping that they would make them lose weight. So it sounds to me like what you're saying, and what I'm trying to get at is like naturopathic medicine is like in between. So you're going to a doctor that can prescribe these medicines, but is like saying, because in my mind, the right approach, going to the doctor shouldn't be, oh, you're morbidly obese, let me just pump you full of Ozempic and, set it and forget it. It should be, look, like we'll use this to jumpstart the process, get you motivated, you're losing weight, plus we got to get you out of this real danger zone with your heart and all of these problems that you're experiencing, right? But fundamentally, you have to have a change of diet and exercise. Like your lifestyle has got to be a focus here. And like that, and maybe these other like healthy vitamins or whatever it is that you supplement with to keep you healthy. But is it more like that? Like it's, okay, maybe we'll use some conventional medicine from time to time if we really need to, but we're really trying to get you into a spot where maybe you're not dependent on it in the way that, typically the way that they've pumped us at this point, full of pharmaceuticals.
Absolutely. So, I mean, again, we want to focus on, the root cause and, first, doing no harm. Those are, the basic principles on which it's founded. And, it's going to vary from patient to patient. We definitely want to look at, okay, where's that center of gravity? Where is that patient need to make those changes? Is the problem they're not getting enough sleep? Is the problem that they're, consuming too much junk food, Is the problem the timing of their eating? Is the problem that they're not moving enough? Is the problem that they have a thyroid condition that needs to be addressed? So, a naturopathic physician is going to be looking at kind of all the different factors and determining based on that patient what we need to address. And that may involve, okay, to help improve your insulin sensitivity, we may give you, certain mineral supplements, such as, chromium or vanadium. We may support you with botanical extracts like berberine, which has some blood sugar controlling properties. And again, depending on the jurisdiction and the scope of practice of the naturopathic physician, they may decide to go ahead and say, okay, maybe we'll just do a microdose of GLP-1s so that we can get, some of those benefits while we're minimizing those side effects. So the approach will differ from doctor to doctor, but ultimately a focus on identifying those lifestyle determinants that need to be addressed is going to be the primary focus. And then we look at, what systems are compromised and how can we help support them.
Okay. So can all naturopathic doctors prescribe? Like, I know you're an MD. Are all naturopathic doctors also MDs, like able to prescribe medications?
They are not. And that's the thing. It depends on the state and the jurisdiction. So in some of like the Western states like Washington and Oregon, they have much more they actually have prescriptive capabilities where they can prescribe a lot of these conventional drugs. In the Midwest, in a lot of states where naturopathic doctors are not licensed based on their state medical boards, then they're going to be focusing on basically the traditional naturopathy, nature cure approach, using, botanicals, using supplements, using homeopathy, focusing on the lifestyle. And then they may, have like a conventional physician that's helping them to kind of manage, that issue from that perspective.
My dream is to have a doctor that can do both. I mean, and I think that's what that's what many of us want, is many of us want a doctor like yourself who, we could go to and say, I got this problem. And then you could assess it and say, okay, well, in this particular case, yes, you need an actual pharmaceutical for a bit. But the dream is to have a doctor say, yeah, but why don't we do the metformin for a bit, I guess, but then we're going to switch you to berberine, right? We're going to like kind of get you, whatever it is, like however they're just, we need kind of, the fewer the pharmaceuticals, the better approach. Like the less is more approach. We don't want to overdose you. We don't want to overload you. We're not trying to just turn you into a pharmaceutical cash cow. Like, we're going to do the perfect blend of pharmaceuticals, natural approach, lifestyle approach. I mean, I think that's what everybody wants at this. I mean, well, I shouldn't say everybody, because I think one of the pressures, and you correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think one of the pressures on the MDs these days is the patients that come in and they just want, we are a fast food, quick fix, give it to me now, like TikTok, 1 minute consumption society now, right? We like everything fast. And so I think that a lot of doctors feel a lot of pressure, probably from the patients themselves, that are like, just give me the damn drugs, doc. Like, give me a pill that's going to fix this. Give me the magic pill, or give me the magic surgery. Like, just do the magic. And they want that rather than doing the hard work of lifestyle change, diet, exercise, that kind of. So I think probably a lot of it is patients kind of are the pushers, but I think a lot of us would like to see doctors that actually can integrate all of the approaches. And when we go to the doctor and we say, look, I've got this rash, the doctor could be, rather than just be like, let me give you a steroid, let me give you a steroid cream, right? Like, just let's try something natural first and see if that helps, or let's see if you're allergic to something, you're eating something you shouldn't be eating, or, let's do this before we jump to steroids. But right now it's like you go to the doctor, they just give you the steroid.
Yep. And again, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. Obviously, there are doctors that are oftentimes, interested in trying to teach, which is, again, what the word doctor comes from, docere, to teach, which they want to teach their patients the importance of healthy living. But, patient expectations are obviously going to play an important role. Patient beliefs are going to play an important role. And if a patient believes that, they have to externalize all of their health to a physician in the form of a pill, an injection, a surgery, and they're not interested in, being regular with, appropriate diet, with appropriate movement, with the appropriate supplementation, that may not be an ideal candidate for seeing a naturopathic doctor. And, every naturopathic doctor is going to be a little bit different approach. Some naturopathic doctors don't really like to work with drugs at all. And that's, absolutely, within, the reason, and within, their choice of how they prefer to, work with their patients. And likewise, there are patients who are highly motivated, who will, typically fare better, and are going to be more likely to be compliant, versus patients who don't. And even with conventional medicine, if a doctor prescribes a medication, the patient isn't taking that essential medication, they're still not addressing the lifestyle causes that are leading to the problem, they're going to continue to get sicker.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So how do we find naturopathic doctors?
The American Association of Naturopathic Physicians is the official organization of accredited naturopathic doctors in the United States. They can be reached at naturopathic.org. Different states will also have their own state naturopathic associations, which you can find that from the Association of Naturopathic Physician website as well. And then oftentimes you'll find directories in which you can find those naturopathic doctors.
How common is it for a naturopathic doctor to also have an MD like you?
Not very common. It does exist. There are some naturopathic doctors who have, several doctorates, medical doctorate, osteopathic, and naturopathic, or naturopathic, chiropractic, and osteopathic. So they do exist, for sure. It all depends on how much of a glutton for punishment additional school you are.
Do you think more MDs are trying to go in this direction of let's look at the whole patient rather than just pump them full of drugs and surgeries?
I would say so. Definitely there's been a growth in kind of integrative medicine, which is kind of conventional medicine plus, other, approaches, complementary approaches. And then like the field of functional medicine, which is, kind of root cause based, from a, systems biology perspective, oftentimes focused on, the importance of gut health as the foundation. So as we've been learning more about the importance of the microbiome, as, we've shifted away from the very heavy antibiotic use in the past that unfortunately has led to, the outbreak of multiple drug resistant, infections. I think a lot of doctors are realizing we need to find, some alternatives. And, in nature, you will find that, there's, a lot of untapped potential when it comes to being able to support health and, even with a lot of these, multiple drug resistant infections, they there was like an interesting, study in Britain where they like found this like 10th century recipe for like an eye salve, using, garlic and ox bile and, fermented in a copper vessel. And they actually, recreated the recipe and they tried it out and found it to be like 90% effective against, these multiple drug resistant, forms of staph. So it was, it's very fascinating. And the fact that, as we're learning more about how the whole body's interconnected, a rash is not something that's just happening in the skin. The skin's a window into the rest of the body, letting you know something internally needs to be addressed, or else this thing is going to get worse. It's not just going to be a skin issue. It may become, a lung issue, another digestive issue, a cardiovascular issue over time.
So can you give us some examples of some of these like herbal or natural medicines that are there any that are more effective than Western medicine, like than, I guess, pharmaceutical medicine, and they're just ignoring them because they're like, we don't want anybody to know about that because we'll lose all of our money?
I think there's a lot of botanicals that have shown efficacy. I mean, even during COVID, for example, I remember when some of the first studies kind of came out talking about having some efficacy, right away in my head, I was thinking, okay, these type of quinine-like compounds that from which, we created, when we have these in other botanicals as well. For example, black seed, Nigella sativa. And, when following the meta-analysis that was coming out comparing, black seed to the existing drugs, Paxlovid, remdesivir and whatnot, there's actually a much higher efficacy of that black seed. But unfortunately, because of the legislative environment in which we live, the kind of the control around information and regulation around that, especially through the FDA, that basically, prevents you from talking about, treating or curing any disease outside of the accepted standards. It makes the communication a little bit challenging, especially in the supplement world. And sometimes they get a little bit, creative in the language in order to essentially, let people know, like, okay, here's something that can be effective, but, you can't say that this treats or cures cancer, for example. That's going to be a big no-no and a big way to get the regulatory agencies after.
Yeah, but they could say that all of these other pharmaceuticals treat things when they don't, right? I mean, that's what they're able to say.
It's a lot of it is kind of based on, okay, if you show some kind of study with some kind of statistical significance, that is equivalent or not inferior than another approach or treatment, that's considered good enough for it to get approved. And, there's a number of drugs where it's like you wonder the process of, noticing bad drugs and removing them. It's not as streamlined of a process. I mean, people probably recall the, Vioxx scandal, which was, again, this anti-inflammatory that was supposed to, avoid the issues with some of the common anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen, but ended up increasing, this heart attack risk. And it took a number of years before, they recognized, hey, there's a problem here, and they were actually able to, get it, those warnings and, get it off the market. But unfortunately, we have a number of issues trying to get these changes, and the sort of the self-policing aspect and regulatory capture that we have in the medical industry kind of, limits our ability to be, truly honest and authentic about the risk-benefit ratios of things. And again, a lot of times we don't know until later on down the line when we're like, oh, wow, we didn't anticipate this. And, here are some of the long-term effects we may have to be concerned about.
Yeah. Well, as it stands, I think the track record with the FDA is 30% of the drugs that they approve eventually have to either be pulled from the market or get a warning label slapped on them. So it might take them, it takes them a long time. It's a lot of them that have to have it done. I mean, it's just incredible, just fun stat. What would you say? I mean, we obviously do have something that RFK Jr. has been talking a lot about, the MAHA movement's been talking a lot about, which is the chronic disease problem, the epidemic that we have in the country at this point. What kind of tips would you give people right now for how we can minimize or lessen, or what can we do individually to minimize our risk of these chronic diseases?
think there's a number of things. First things first, I mean, just kind of taking, ownership of your health, making an attempt to focus on, high quality, whole foods, making sure that you have adequate movement. But beyond that, I think, we talk about, naturopathic medicine being holistic. It's important to address kind of like that mental health aspect. And, we live in an age of increasing, chronic stress. And, this, is going to get in the way of that natural healing process, which is what, naturopathic medicine seeks to do, is to stimulate those natural healing processes. So, taking ownership for that, seeking an adequately, trained practitioner, whether it's, a naturopathic physician, whether it's a functional medicine doctor, someone that can take a look at, run testing as necessary, because there's a lot of people that are dealing with a lot of chronic toxicity, whether it's, heavy metals, whether it's, microplastics, it can be environmental due to molds. So there can be a lot of different things that are having this impact on health. And depending on what that root cause is, the approach is going to be different from one person to another.
Okay. All right. Tell us about Fitra Wellness Center. What is this?
So Fitra Wellness Center, located in Janesville, Wisconsin, out of which I operate a practice. And, it started with one of my colleagues who's a traditional herbalist, focusing on, using different herbs with honey, based on, the principles of Unani herbalism, which is kind of the Greco-Persian system of medicine that, evolved, during the, 10th centuries onward. And, again, focus on a number of different healing modalities, use of cupping therapy, which is, something that's common to a number of different healing traditions, as well as, again, counseling on the lifestyle, prescribing adequate herbs when necessary.
Looks like you have a lot of teas, things that people can kind of shop around and explore and get a consultation. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Well, I didn't know about naturopathic medicine until you just told me about it. So I'm glad I know about it now. I would like to, for myself, try to seek out. I've just moved. I don't know, but I'm wondering in my state. I've just moved to Idaho, so I'm kind of wondering what the rules are in Idaho, if they're allowed to. I would prefer somebody that can do both, that could actually prescribe Western medicine when needed. But we try other things first. Like if I do show up and I'm like, I got this rash, I'd like them to be like, oh yeah, let me try this first. And then if it doesn't work, then be like, all right, we do now have to maybe try something a bit more aggressive. Like I like the idea of the whole, like both Western and Eastern, or however you want to call it, or allopathic and naturopathic. Is that what is that the term? Allopathic.
Yep.
And because I grew up, I'm half Vietnamese. I grew up with that just naturally. I had, that's the way, like whenever I got sick, we always tried herbs first. I mean, that was like the way to go, is whenever I had a problem, my mom would, and my dad actually, who was very much into that, would try the natural way first and try everything that we could for natural. And it was always kind of the way that I was raised, was always the less drugs, the better. Like do everything you can to not take a pill, to not take pharmaceuticals, to not turn to that. Like do everything you can first. And I would like to see doctors who have that approach. And it sounds like that's more of a naturopathic type of doctor for me.
Yeah, and there are naturopathic physicians in Idaho. You can do a search, especially around like the major cities and whatnot. But in the West Coast, they tend to have a higher scope of practice compared to say the Midwest where I'm located. And then there's a few states on the East Coast where they also have a little bit more of a practice, and part of that just kind of has to do with like just the history there. But
sure.
You make a very valid point. I mean, this approach that can kind of hybridize, like, in China, you'll find that they'll oftentimes kind of synergize in their hospitals. Like, they'll go ahead, they'll use drugs, but then they will use traditional Chinese medicine and those principles in order to kind of support the body in dealing with the drug, based on their principles of formulation. likewise in both Japan and China, when it comes to, patients dealing with cancer, it's like, yeah, they'll give them conventional, chemotherapy and surgery, but then they'll, it's a standard of care to use mushroom extracts, because of their, huge immune benefits in supporting patients with cancer. And so that just kind of becomes, it's very standard to kind of have a mix of those. And again, It depends on, the level of severity you're dealing with. And even when it comes to, using herbs, there's some herbs that are, very, mild, safe, that you're going to have a very hard time overdosing with, like, dandelion or hibiscus or lemon balm. And then there are other herbs that are pretty potent, and especially when you tend to concentrate and potentize, those main active constituents, you actually start to kind of have a drug-like action. And if you kind of use the sort of American approach of more is better, and you start, mega dosing on these highly concentrated botanicals, you can end up doing some damage to yourself. And that's why it is important to work with somebody who is trained in kind of recognizing using these different therapeutics and recognizing when they're not appropriate as well.
Well, Dr. Karim Kandil, thank you so much for being here and educating us on this. I found it very fascinating, and definitely would like to seek out doctors like yourself for my own care. And I'm sure a lot of people watching feel the same way. So we will have the links down below to where people can find those, to find naturopathic doctors. Also, we have the link down below to Fitra Wellness Center, to the, how do you say this? Unani Herbal? UnaniHerbal.net?
Unani, yep.
Unani Herbal. We do have the link down below to that. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's my pleasure.
Hey guys, thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you could check out Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.